You mention you're renting, and someone says it. Probably a family member who bought a house 20 years ago. You know you're just throwing money away, right? And you don't have a great response. Something feels off about it, but you can't put your finger on exactly what. So you nod, or change the subject, or add it to the mental list of things you should probably sort out before you feel like a real adult. Here's what's actually off about it. The throwing money away argument only works if you're comparing rent to equity. And you're not paying for equity when you rent. You're paying for a place to live. The landlord is providing a service. You're paying for it. The real question, the one almost nobody frames correctly, is what happens when you compare buying versus renting and investing the difference. Not buying versus renting and investing. And when you run that comparison honestly, with all the numbers that usually get left out, the math is a lot closer than the conventional wisdom crowd wants you to believe. In a lot of cities, over a lot of realistic time horizons, renting wins. Let's talk about what the throwing money away argument leaves out. When you take out a mortgage, most of your payment in the early years isn't going toward equity. It's going toward interest. On a 30-year mortgage at typical rates, in the first year you might pay somewhere around $18,000 in interest and only $3,000 toward actual ownership of the property. That $18,000 in interest goes to the bank. It doesn't come back. It doesn't build equity. By that exact logic, you're also throwing money away as a homeowner, just to a lender instead of a landlord. The framing just sounds different. Then there's property tax. In most American cities, that's somewhere between 1% and 2% of your home's value every year, indefinitely. On a $500,000 house, that's $5,000 to $10,000 a year, every year you own it, that you never see again. Plus homeowner's insurance, plus maintenance. And the standard estimate for maintenance is roughly 1% of the home's value per year. On a $500,000 house, that's another $5,000 annually on average. And that's a real number, not theoretical. Roofs age. Water heaters fail. The HVAC goes out at the worst possible time. Add it up. On a $500,000 home, you can easily spend $20,000 to $25,000 per year in costs that build zero equity. Interest payments in the early years, taxes, insurance, and maintenance combined. That's before we even get to the number that almost never comes up in this conversation. Now here's where the math gets genuinely interesting, because most people forget about the down payment entirely. The down payment is not free money. It's capital you had that you're now locking into a house. If you put $100,000 down, and that money had instead stayed invested in a broad market index fund over the same period, it would have historically grown at somewhere around 7 to 10% per year. Over 10 years, $100,000 growing at 8% becomes roughly $215,000. Over 15 years, it becomes closer to $320,000. That's the opportunity cost. It's not money you lost. It's return you gave up the chance to earn. It's one of the largest numbers in the rent versus buy equation, and it almost never shows up in the conversation at the family dinner table. And then there are transaction costs. When you buy, closing costs typically run 2 to 5% of the purchase price. When you sell, real estate commissions run around 5 to 6%. On a $500,000 house, that's $35,000 to $55,000 in transaction costs. Money paid before you know whether appreciation covers it. If you sell after 5 years and the house appreciated 15%, the commissions alone eat a significant portion of that gain. Add all of this together. The house has to appreciate meaningfully before you've actually come out ahead compared to renting and investing the same capital elsewhere. In high-cost markets, Seattle, Denver, Boston, most of coastal California, The real break-even point is frequently 7 to 12 years, sometimes longer. Below that horizon, the math often favors renting. And here's the part that actually changes how you read this whole debate. Almost nobody who owns a home has done this math. The full version, including everything. Think about how homeowners calculate their return. They bought the house for $400,000. It's now worth $600,000. I made $200,000. Simple, right? But subtract the interest paid over 10 years. Subtract the property taxes. Subtract the maintenance. Subtract the insurance. Subtract the transaction costs on both ends. Subtract the opportunity cost of the down payment compounding in the market over the same decade. When people do this calculation, and there are economists who have, the actual return on homeownership, properly measured, is significantly lower than the headline number suggests. Yale economist Robert Shiller, who has studied U.S. housing prices for decades, found that real home values have historically appreciated at around 0.5% per year after inflation. Not 8%, not 10%, 0.5%. The house almost certainly didn't generate the return the owner thinks it did. What it did was force a savings habit, because the mortgage payment was non-negotiable, that the market doesn't impose on renters. That forced savings mechanism is genuinely valuable. It's one of the real arguments for buying, but it's completely different from claiming the investment itself outperformed other options. Conflating those two things is where the math gets muddied. Now here's where it gets personal. Because home ownership in this country isn't just a financial decision, it's an identity marker. It's how you prove you made it. It's what your parents expected. It's the thing that makes the questions at family dinners stop. And when you're renting, especially if you're renting by choice or by circumstance in a market where buying genuinely doesn't pencil out, there's a low-grade background shame that's hard to shake. Like you're behind. Like you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing with your life. That shame has a real cost. It pushes people to buy at the wrong time, in the wrong market, at a stretch they can barely afford, because the emotional pressure to own has nothing to do with the actual math. And the people applying that pressure usually mean well. They're not trying to steer you wrong. They bought a house, the house went up in value, and they drew a direct line from ownership to success. The problem is that the line isn't as direct as it looks from where they're standing. The question worth sitting with is, who is your housing decision actually for? Is it the decision that makes the most financial sense for your specific situation, your market, your timeline? Or is it the decision that makes the conversation at family dinners go away? Both are honest answers, but they're different decisions, and they shouldn't be dressed up as the same one. Here's the reframe. Renting is a legitimate financial strategy when the math supports it. It provides flexibility, lower fixed costs, no maintenance liability, and the ability to put capital to work in assets that have historically grown faster than residential real estate in most markets over most time periods. That's not a consolation prize. That's a real choice. Buying is also a legitimate financial strategy when the math supports it, and when the non-financial factors, like stability, community, roots, and the genuine psychological benefit of having a place that belongs to you, are part of the calculation, honestly. Those things have real value, just not financial value. And the decision should reflect that clearly. The word throwing is doing a lot of work in the conventional wisdom here. Rent buys you a place to live, the freedom to move, and the option to deploy capital elsewhere. Whether that option gets used is what determines whether renting works financially. So what do you actually do with this? First, before you make any decision about buying, run the real break-even number for your specific market, not the national average, your city, your price range, your down payment amount, your realistic rate. The New York Times has a rent versus buy calculator that includes all of these variables and is the most complete one I've come across. Run it. If the break-even is 7 years or more, ask yourself honestly whether you're planning to stay that long. Be honest. People systematically overestimate how long they'll stay. Second, the rent and invest strategy only works if you actually invest. This is where most of the argument falls apart in practice. If you're renting and spending what you would have paid in property taxes, maintenance, and down payment returns on other things, you lose. The financial case for renting is built on the assumption that the capital goes to work. If it doesn't, a house, with its forced savings mechanism, would have served you better. Renting wins financially only when the flexibility it creates gets used. Third, separate the housing decision from the identity decision. They don't have to be the same choice. You can buy a home for real reasons: community, stability, school districts, permanence, and not dress those reasons up as financial logic. And you can rent strategically without apologizing to anyone. What you can't do is make a clear-eyed financial decision while the emotional pressure of what people will think is running quietly in the background. That combination almost always costs more than the decision itself. Someone telling you you're throwing money away on rent is not giving you financial advice. They're telling you something about how they see success and belonging. That's worth understanding. It's just not worth building a financial plan around. Your rent is paying for a place to live. What you do with the rest of the math is entirely up to you. If you've ever run the actual numbers on rent versus buy for your market, or if you tried and the answer surprised you, drop it in the comments. Tell me the city, tell me what you found. I think there are a lot of people who have never actually done this math, and hearing real examples from real markets is more useful than anything I can say in a general video. And if this is the kind of conversation that's worth continuing, real analysis, not just conventional wisdom, subscribe. We do this every week.